Yeah, you know, I was just thinking that this very meeting that we're having is a testament and an example of what we call the ego condor prophecy, and that we're utilizing this modern, arguably Western technology for communication to converse about a largely indigenous form of communication. So it's pretty cool. And the I.AM.LIFE project is a nonprofit organization I started here that I don't necessarily run so much anymore. And the goal of that project was to basically fulfill the essence of the ego condor prophecy, which was to bridge the best of Western technology and ideas with indigenous ideas, technology, and cosmology. So we do that by producing events that are all around the idea of interconnectivity. We often have indigenous speakers, musicians, shamans, wisdom keepers, and we host to kind of emulate the idea of ceremony. We usually do a tea ceremony or a cacao ceremony that brings everybody into the ceremony space. And then we do an exchange of Western ideas and music and sometimes media. So that's pretty much what the I.AM.LIFE project is. I tend to think of it as my public and way of bringing the benefits of medicine ceremony to communities. It's fun watching you.
Yeah, we're sitting in the chairs here, so it's a little noisy for a minute. So I got to sound bad on your side. So that's what's happening. Okay. So the I.AM.LIFE Foundation.
Yep. Yeah. So did you hear what I just shared?
Yeah.
Yeah, we could hear you pretty good, actually.
Okay, great.
But we mental chairs a moment ago. So
Yeah.
it's going bang, bang.
I can, you're very muffled on my end, but I can definitely make you out so I can hear you.
Yeah, I can repeat anything. That's better than can you hear me better? Yeah. I'm close to that. Perfect. I'll repeat questions if people say something then.
Okay, cool. So do you want to just jump in, or do you want to ask any questions first, or how would you like to proceed?
I think we're going to ask.
Yeah,
we're going to do asking afterwards.
Yeah. So I think let's go around the room and have everybody else introduce themselves. Let me read the objective of the club, and then let's let you jump right on in.
Great. I'd love to meet everybody.
So I'm Toby. I'm the president of the Denver Psychedelic Club. Thank you guys so much for coming tonight. This is our one-year meeting, so I think this is our largest meeting we've ever had. So I'm so appreciative. Thank you guys so much for coming and joining and building a community with us.
Hi, my name is Andrea. I'm a native of North Dakota, and I also spent several months at the Standing Rock camp and studying ayahuasca. I'm studying shamanism for several months, or for several years. So I'm curious to learn about your connection between indigenous cultures in North America and South America. If you have any thoughts on that.
Thank you for being a Standing Rock.
It's my pleasure.
I'm Andrea. I'm kind of new to this, so I am just kind of absorbing it as we go along, seeing what unfolds.
Great.
Hey, Tony, I'm Tony. I'm an old head from back in the 60s and just coming back around again for the second visit. So, yeah.
Cool. It's a good time.
I'm John. Kind of new to this field. I'm looking at the spiritual ideology and glad to be here. Aloha, everybody. I'm Richard Badley. Aloha, and a member of the Psychedelic.
I'm Ashley. Tony, we met when I was living in LA, so it's good to see you again.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm super interested in psychedelics as medicine and capacity for healing.
Hey, I'm Amanda. I've been psychedelics for therapeutic uses.
My name's Kenny, and pretty much everyone same ideas, you know, spiritual, and just kind of curious of experiences and what else I can learn from.
Great.
I'm Casey. It's my first meeting. I met Tyler at Sonic Bloom about a month ago. I just got back from Costa Rica, did a couple ayahuasca ceremonies down there, and so here this week for good introduction to the psychedelic part. So, looking forward to today.
My name's Justin. It's not this time group. November back from just looking to do for the modern year and yeah, just restarting the life. Yeah, it's an adjustment, but it's good.
My name's Stephanie, and I'm actually not even here. I'm here because I've been eyeing psychedelics for a while. I have some serious mental illnesses, borderline personality disorder, bipolar, addicted, and thus far, I'm sure some of you can tell. I mean, this is my third meeting. I've taken Wonderland twice, and I've never been this stable in my life. So that's why I'm here. I'm Blake, and this is my first time soaking in.
I'm Kat. I'm new to the group also. I work in the behavioral health field actually and in healthcare, so I'm kind of just like going rogue and doing my own research since it's not totally embraced at a systematic level yet. But I've heard anecdotally that it helps people tremendously, especially with PTSD and depression. So I'm doing some field research to see what I can find. So.
Great.
I'm Tyler, the founder and co-director of the chapter. And I started this a year ago, and I had no idea that we were trying to do this. So I just want to thank everybody for being here. And it's
Hi, I'm Jacob. Looking forward to hearing your talk. Just interested in psychedelics, and yeah, thank you for being here.
Yep.
I'm Huddy. I'm the one who was emailing you about doing this, so thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And yeah, I'm just interested in psychedelics for spiritual and therapeutic growth. Rather.
Cool.
I'm Steve, and this is the first time here. I experimented back in the early 20s, my early 20s, and as you can see, I passed that. Still trying.
I'm Lisa from New Zealand. Yes, hi. Interested in psychedelics and its mental.
Hi, I'm Kylie. I am part of the Psychedelic Club when I can be, and I'm interested in psychedelics for therapeutic purposes.
Great.
I'm Rick Thundercrow. I'm a NAC traditional Wachinero.
Great.
Been Wachinero for about 38, 40 years. I've been doing a long time. Worked with therapists and other people, helping people with illnesses and mental illnesses, all kinds of stuff.
Cool. Thank you.
I'm Jared. This is my first meeting. I total novice in psychedelics. So
I'm Julia. It's my first time here. Excited to meet you all.
I am Ben. Went to Kios a couple years ago, did ayahuasca for the first time. Kind of experimenting with different psychedelics since then. Always been just interested in experimenting. I'm just interested for the medicinal process as well.
Cool.
I'm going to be well. First day in Denver. They'll show you my experience. I have around like 6 times in the past. I have been falling out with it. So ecstasy.
Hello everybody, my name is Joey. I'm the Vice President of Psychedelic Club. Thank you all for coming. I've done DMT countless amount of times, pretty sweet. Good with ayahuasca. Something LSD's clean with.
My name is Daniela. This is my first time here. I've been started out in Panama since 1968. And just go to a lot of conferences. 15 years ago, this is where my parents was living. And I've always found community that venture into themselves.
Great.
I'm Elizabeth. I've been to Iquitos a couple times to do ayahuasca ceremonies down there.
Cool.
I'm finding here just for the spiritual medical. I dabbled in psychedelics about 20 years ago.
I'm Will. This is my first time here. Just really curious to learn more about ayahuasca, so that's why I'm here.
I'm definitely mine. Okay. I'm Devin. This is also my first time here. I use ayahuasca, like experience other psychedelics, and I really use it to find my spiritual side. It's like kind of like a very spiked religions, and like, whenever I'm in my own state of mind,
All right, guys, I'm just going to read the objectives of the club real quick, and then we'll get right into it.
Great.
The objective of the club shall be to provide education regarding the truth about psychedelics and non-judgmental support for people to integrate their experiences. The club neither condones nor condemns the use of psychedelics, but intends to raise objective awareness about how psychedelics can be used therapeutically in fields such as public and mental health, academia, science, spirituality, and harm reduction. This is not a new beginning, but a continuation of a movement already brewing. Our objective is to facilitate its success. The mission of the club is to create a safe space for people to discuss all things psychedelics. The club was founded upon the idea of cognitive liberty, to explore consciousness. Communication, including active listening and using I statements. This is not a place to source drugs. Please be respectful of the rules or we ask you to leave. The floor is all yours.
That's great. Well, it's exciting to meet all of you. As I was saying earlier, it's really beautiful that we can utilize technology in this way, particularly to talk about something that is an ancient indigenous form of technology and communication. I have my headphones on. Did it affect your sound at all? You can hear me okay?
Nope, you are coming through clear.
Okay, great. So I've been working with, what was that?
Turn it up.
Oh, turn it up. Okay, great.
You probably hear some echo in this room. Okay, yeah.
Perfect. I think we're good to go.
Good. Okay. I've been working with ayahuasca now. I'm entering the 23rd year, which is amazing for me too. And I initially started working with ayahuasca, serendipitously, quite by accident. I was running a coffee house in Long Beach, California. It was the first all-organic coffee house there. And because of that, it was drawing in a very kind of alternative, experimental, adventurous crowd of people. And on one of the weekends there, a friend of mine came in and said, hey, there's an ayahuasca ceremony this weekend, and you're welcome to join us. And like everybody else at the time, I said, what? Right? This is, for me, this was pre-internet. I mean, the internet was beginning to be a popular, tool. And we had access to it, but I wasn't utilizing it much. So when he mentioned ayahuasca, I really had no reference point for it. But he did say to me, he said, it's like that movie, Emerald Forest. And I had just seen that film and loved it. So like a lot of Western people, I went to my first ayahuasca ceremony with a very romanticized expectation. You know, I really assumed that we were going to be like on the floor and connecting with our spirit animal, and you know, in that film, what's portrayed as an ayahuasca ceremony was actually a hape ceremony, which is an Amazonian snuff, and they blow it into the nose. So I was expecting that actually. And we get there, and it turns out it was a meeting of the Santo Daime, which is a religion, an ayahuasca church from Brazil. So I immediately was kind of thrown off by that. And as we're sitting there in our chairs, you know, their ceremonies are hosted in chairs with all the lights on. And I assumed initially that, oh, this must be like the holding room. Like we're going to sit here, have some kind of talk, and then we're going to go into the jungle, right? And it became clear pretty soon that that wasn't the case, as all the members of the church came in wearing their little uniforms, and you know, we started lining up to drink. And my first thought was, oh my God, man, this is a cult. You know, I got tricked. And because I had that initial reaction, I was very unopen to the experience. So my first drink of ayahuasca had, at least as I experienced it, no effect on me at all. I was mainly irritated with the entire set and setting. So much so that at some point, I actually went downstairs from this lodge we were in, and I called my friend while in the ceremony on the phone, and he says, what are you doing calling me? Like, how's the ceremony? And I said, oh man, I got tricked. There's nothing happening. I wasted all my money. There's all these people upstairs pretending they're having an experience. Right? And mind you, I was in the category of people at that time that had done no prior psychedelic exploration. You know, I had, was smoking ganja at the time, not even on a regular basis. So I really had no preparation for an altered state of consciousness. So during that phone call, one of the members of the church came down and says, hey, what are you doing here on the phone? And I say to my friend, oh man, I gotta go, the Nazis are here. So I was just, yeah, really, really terrible. Worst case scenario for an ayahuasca facilitator was who I was being. So I go upstairs and we line up and we have the second drink, and I go to my seat, and really purely out of frustration and, you know, exasperation, I ended up crossing my arms and like putting my head down, and my head exploded, and here we are talking to you 22 years later, basically. Yeah.
Tony, brother, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Is that if you lean back a little bit, we'll be able to see your face properly, that there's sunlight's coming through the blind.
Yeah, the sun is setting here, so I'll try to stay back for you.
Hallucinatory, man. So we gotta put up, you know, so kick back a little bit from the camera, we can see better.
Cool. So that began an amazing journey. I did stay with the Santo Daime Ayahuasca Church on and off for about 12 years. But during that period of course, I got exposed to and started studying and exploring shamanism, and ended up working with my first shamanic teacher. His name was Don Jose Campos, who was then not famous. He has since then emerged as one of the premier ayahuasqueros. And I didn't know I was in training at the time. It was just a journey of exploration for me. And I met him and ended up being asked to be one of his sitters. We call them guardians. Someone that basically just helps to take care of people during the ceremony. So I got really amazing training during that period. So fast forward, on my 40th birthday, what Western people call a midlife crisis, I entered into this spiritual emergency, or what we now refer to archetypally as dark night of the soul. And what emerged from that was a really intense, dark depression, which now, you know, I recognize and share with people is what we are now referring to as a spiritual emergence or spiritual emergency. And in that space, you know, I started to question reality as I had known it. I was a social and environmental activist at the time, and was starting to question the validity and the effects of the work that I was doing. All I knew is that the planet at the time I saw was fucked up and that it needed support. Right? So during that time period, I was fortunate enough to be able to pretty much lock myself in my house for about 2 weeks, and was just reading spiritual texts and doing a lot of meditation. And what came out of that for me, I reached a state which all of us get into occasionally, which now we're referring to as a flow state of clarity. And I was thinking to myself, okay, what is really happening on the planet and what's the problem with humanity? And as I saw it at the time, which has since panned out to be true, at the core of really all of the problems humanity is facing right now is a lack of connection. And we've lost this lack of connection to the earth, to the cosmos, and to each other. And the way that indigenous people maintained that connection was through ritual and ceremony. You know, it's in ceremony and ritual where the cosmologies are shared, you know, where the community values are shared. And the rituals that include sacraments, it's where it was a safe place to expand consciousness, which we would now call, you know, doing psycho-spiritual work, right? So from that period, I realized, you know, this is where I can make a difference. You know, what humanity actually needs right now is not better legislation or even grassroots movements, which are important. What we need is an evolution in human consciousness. So I realized, like, here's an area where I can actually make a difference. It's a subject that I'm passionate about. I have tools for it. And I have this history of working with ayahuasca at this point. So I decided to really kind of reinvent my work with community building, ceremony, and sacrament use as a way of expanding human consciousness. So that's what I've been doing ever since, and it has taken me all around the world doing it, and it brings me here in front of you today, actually. So a couple of things that tie in really beautifully together, which is the topic of what I want to talk about, is one, this concept of the ego condor prophecy, and the other is ayahuasca and the racial divide, because they go hand in hand. For those of you that don't know, and I'm going to give a very condensed version of this, about 500 years ago, all around the planet, indigenous people received from their elders and shamans and spiritual leaders that there was going to be this oncoming period of turmoil, which we now, you know, genocide, colonization, and basically this taking over of the Americas. So what they were told was, and this is really rooted in both South America and Native American cultures, they were told that there would be a period of time when the Americas would split. But not to worry that after this 500-year period, the Americas would come together again. They referred to it as the ego condor prophecy. The ego representing North America, which is the way of the mind and technology, and the condor representing South America, which is the way of the heart, the feminine, and intuition. The ego is considered masculine. And it's really fascinating, this time period that we're in, because 2012, as you know, all over the world, 2012 is being celebrated and recognized as this significant time period. It turns out it was also the culmination of this prophecy. And interestingly enough, what a lot of people were saying, and are still saying now, is that the only way for humanity to move forward, really, is to bring together the best of indigenous worldviews and cosmologies and technologies with Western and contemporary worldviews, technologies, and cosmologies. You know, and quite literally what that prophecy is saying is bringing together the heart and the mind. And that is exactly what we're finding ourselves in during this time period. And regardless of one's relationship with the concept of prophecy, the meaning of that prophecy and the content is absolutely true. You know, the way of the feminine heart and the mind, untempered, doesn't work. You know, and the way of pure technology, masculinity, you know, well, I say sorry, for the feminine, the way of intuition and the heart, you know, doesn't work purely by itself. And the Western approach of pure technology, the mind, and science doesn't work either. When we bring those things together, we have a really, really powerful tool and a way to move forward. We're seeing it showing up everywhere now, from this renaissance and revolution in psychedelic research and use. Even in this movement, we're seeing everywhere of sustainability and permaculture. You know, permaculture is really pulled from indigenous land use. You know, it's a way that indigenous people lived in harmony with the land. We match that with Western research and science and understandings about what's happening with the technology of agriculture, and then we get this amazing, you know, approach to land use and human development that actually works and is sustainable. So it's interesting that in the 60s, you know, what's largely been recognized is that the 60s was really just the introduction of, we'll say, psychedelics to Western culture, like altered states to Western people. And it caused a huge rupture, in the way that the Western psyche works. And of course, the backlash of that was that all of the research and the possibilities had to go underground. But the research was still going, but not in a way that it could be published and shared with the public. So the exciting times that we're in now is that there is this renaissance taking place. Through organizations like the MAPS organization, suddenly there is government-sanctioned, research. As you all know, just to name a few, the work with PTSD and MDMA, mushrooms for relieving anxiety and depression, ayahuasca, infinite number of things is being researched for, but predominantly, again, for cures in depression and anxiety and addiction. The same with iboga. All of these ancient plant medicines and sacraments are now finding their place and being validated in the Western psyche and experience. So it's really exciting during that time period, that those things are coming together. So which leads us to the next part of the talk, and what we'll bounce around, but the question that was kind of the elephant in the room over the last 10 years of me working really professionally all over the world with this work is, where are all the people of color? Once again, we have an amazing gift and tool and technology gifted to us from indigenous people, from South America in this case, yet we're not seeing those people participate by and large in the ayahuasca movement or the psychedelic renaissance that's taking place in the West, right? So being African American, working with plant medicines, that's not foreign to my cultural tradition. There's iboga and some other things, but it is it is unique to be an ayahuasquero working in the West and being African American. So I will share with you what I have seen over the last 10 years of why I believe there is a racial divide. Some of them are kind of obvious in the realm of what's being now called appropriation. A lot of people of color say basically that, and I'm quoting them in a very generalized way, that, well, this is just another case of white people finding that there's something really amazing going on with indigenous people and adopting it and sharing it for themselves, basically. And in that, commercializing it, commodifying it, and making it something available because of the price tag only to elite people. Okay? So once again, here you have this amazing modality for not only physical, psycho-spiritual healing and physical healing, that also happens to be a tool for transcendence, And because of the price tag being attached to it and the elite circles that it's moving in, that both poor people and people of color aren't having access to it. So in a very generalized way, yes, that is true. But I tell you what's more true is that drug use in quotation marks, for people of color is a very valid taboo. That's what's really happening, right? If you think about it, it's both an African American and I would say at least here in California, any cultures related to South America, and Mexican cultures, those cultures have been ripped apart by drug use, not by sacrament use or even psychedelic use. We're talking, heroin and crack, cocaine. The interesting irony of that is that those substances, and a lot of you have probably done your homework, were systematically introduced into those cultures as a way of tearing those cultures apart, right? It became a very convenient way to oppress people of color, and for being caught with something as minor as a small hit of cocaine, you can spend the next 10 years in jail, which has become, a lot of books and documentaries are now coming out about this subject called the new Jim Crow. It became a new way of demonizing and incarcerating people of color. So because of that, the news about psychedelics being used as psychospiritual tools, or the very concept of sacraments being used as a way for spiritual development, that message is not landing in communities of people of color, right? Instead, those substances are being grouped in the category of drugs. And drugs are bad, right? Drugs are taboo. And So that's the main reason that most people of color are not interested in psychedelics, right? Because the information about the positive attributes and use of them is not landing in those communities yet. It's in the very early stages of doing that. The other is, as you know, what allowed African-American people specifically to survive slavery and all the new forms of slavery that have incarnated since then has been their attachment to the church, you know, to Christianity, particularly, you know, Christianity as it shows up in the Baptist religion. So again, the dominant message from the churches, you know, and from the cultural taboos in the society is that drugs are bad and that they will tear your communities apart and most likely have you crazy and put you homeless on the street, right? So this is what I found is the main reason most people of color are not interested in psychedelics for anything other than tripping, which has its place too, and I don't want to demonize that. And it's also the reason why the information isn't getting to them, right? Because most people of color are not traveling in circles of progressive people and meeting in coffee houses like you are, and having mature, open, and intelligent conversations about something that we've all been, through propaganda, misinformed about, basically. So one of my missions, when I started to have this realization, the first public event of any kind that I did around this work, because as you know, ayahuasca is illegal, even though I do it in legal places, I didn't want to be associated with it. I got asked by Amber Lyon, I'll talk about her in a second, to do an on-camera interview with her. Amber Lyon was a two-time Emmy Award-winning journalist for CNN, and one of her missions, she was held at gunpoint, and right before the trigger was pulled, someone intervened that spoke the language of the people that were speaking there and basically told them that she was a journalist. And in that moment, her life was spared. But it caused her such stress that she came home with PTSD, so much so that she couldn't function. So she ends up going on the Joe Rogan show. And while she's on this show, Joe says to her, like, oh, you should try ayahuasca. And she'd never heard of it. And, you know, in Joe Rogan fashion, he says to her, no, you should tomorrow get on a plane and go to South America and do ayahuasca. So sure enough, right, the next day she has this amazing panic attack and basically decided to take his advice. She goes to the airport and buys a ticket, you know, to go to South America and do ayahuasca. And she tells me this story, which is mind-boggling. She bought the ticket and the plane wasn't leaving for a few hours. So she went out to her car and she realized she was completely unprepared for this trip. So she's thinking like, wow, okay, what do I have here? I have a toothbrush, I have a flashlight, that'll be good to take. So, yeah, so completely on a leap of faith, she goes to South America. To her credit, finds a credible ayahuasquero and does ayahuasca, and sure enough has a life transforming experience. And basically that ceremony told her, it's like, you know, what you've been doing, Amber, is focusing on the problems. You're using media as a way to focus on what's wrong. The possibility is to use media and your platform as a way to focus on what's possible. So she comes back and she starts this amazing website called Reset Me. It's called reset.me. And decided that what she was going to do was now focus on what were the possible solutions to what was happening with humanity. So through some friends, she heard about my work. I ended up saying yes to this interview. And I said, yes, I will do the interview under one condition, that one of our topics is the benefits of ayahuasca for people of color, specifically African-American people. And we can flesh that out. So she agreed, and we do the interview, and lo and behold, it became the most popular and most viewed interview of the whole series that she did, with a lot of really important, like, big names. And yeah, I'm really happy to say that from that interview on, within a week, I was starting to get calls from African-American people all over the country interested in ayahuasca and wanting to know where they could legally do it. So it's a big, big success and launched me into basically being kind of a public advocate for this medicine in general, you know, its resurgence and what it can offer Western people, but specifically what it can offer people of color who I, you know, on camera often said are suffering from what's been coined as post-traumatic slave syndrome. It's not something that has been adopted officially as a syndrome, but any African-American people paying attention can tell you that's exactly what's at the core of the challenges that African-American people are facing. You know, that there is an overall, obviously not everyone, but there is an overall fallout and suffering from the years of the trauma of slavery and being in a country that basically still, in a lot of ways, practices the same oppressive, practices basically. But jumping a little bit into ayahuasca in general, the amazing thing about ayahuasca is that it offers what we call a transgenerational healing. You know, when I was working with ayahuasca early on, that was something that I was experiencing and that the shamans were saying was possible, but there was no research or, you know, Western validation of that process. And as you know, in the last 2 years, some of you may not know, now there's research that proves unequivocally that the trauma and stresses and experiences of our ancestors are all encoded in our DNA. We all carry it, right? And like it or not, we're all acting out variations of those traumas in our lives, right? So here you have this amazing modality and technology, you know, substance ayahuasca, that really goes in and works on a cellular level. And what people have been reporting for dozens of years is that they go into ceremony thinking that what they want to heal is like their, you know, pancreatic cancer or their depression or anxiety. And lo and behold, the core of their ceremony is ancestral work, as we call it. What they actually tap into is, wow, all of my ancestors came and I was experiencing them going through famine or being in a war or being raped or whatever it is, you know, or the opposite, being the oppressor, you know. We had a guy come to ceremony and after 2 or 3, he didn't want to come back because every ceremony, what he was experiencing, turns out he was German, what he was experiencing was a perspective of the Germans as oppressors, you know, and dealing with the effect that had on the spirit of his ancestors being caught in that trauma, right? So whether you were on the receiving or giving end of these traumas, we're still carrying them and they're still playing themselves out. So clearly what I saw was like, wow, this medicine could be really powerful for African-American people, you know, to start to lift themselves from this, the bondage and the fallout from trauma, and of course people everywhere, but in my case, specifically African-American people. So that became the core and the foundation of the work that I was doing for a while. And of course, although I'm still committed to that, the reality is, you know, as I said earlier, if we're talking about healing people, which I call, you know, a multi-dimensional healing, body, mind, and spirit. If we're looking at that as an approach to wanting to participate and advance the evolution of human consciousness, at some point you realize you can't do it without healing the past. It's almost impossible. We do have to have a sense of where we are, how we got here, and how we're wired, right? The only way to really solve conflict, as you know, is to get to the core and the foundation of the conflict itself, or the confrontation. So this is the beauty of this resurgence of psychedelic use, plant medicine use, and ayahuasca specifically at this time period, that right at this period, which I find really phenomenal, you know, and it takes a moment to really get present to it, that right at this period when humanity is racing towards the edge of the cliff, you know, wanting to throw ourselves out, and for the first time, really have the possibility of extinguishing life on this planet, that here from the jungles of South America, this plant emerges that allows you to actually have a dialogue with the plant itself. It's really amazing. And the most common experience people have with ayahuasca is that it shows up in the form of a feminine presence, you know, Pachamama, Gaia, whatever it is, as the jungle. And in that, there begins to be this dialogue, you know, and what starts off as what I like to call the personal healing, the healing of whatever it is that you're there to want to transcend, whether it's physical or psychospiritual, that quickly dovetails into what we call transpersonal healing. You start to realize that you're not coming to ceremonies so much just for yourself anymore, but you realize that you really are, in ways that you don't fully understand, engaging in ancestral healing, and you become sensitized to what's happening on the planet. And what automatically opens up is, what's my life's purpose? How do I participate in what's going on? How can I make a contribution? Okay? That's the beauty of ayahuasca emerging at this particular time period. And the beauty of it being part of what the indigenous people are calling the fulfillment of the Eagle Condor prophecy, that ayahuasca would emerge from the jungles of South America, travel across the sea, and start to bridge together the best of, Western and indigenous traditional cosmologies and technologies. And I think approaches to how to move forward, you know, and keep the best of both. Okay. As you know, technology is beautiful. You know, will it save the planet? No. You know, an indigenous worldview of walking in harmony with nature is also beautiful. That's not going to save the world, right? But if we can bridge together that sense of reconnectivity with the planet, our understanding of our place in the cosmos, and return to a sense of awe and wonder about that, you know, and match that with technology and Western ideas and thought, you end up with what I think is what we're starting to see, a new form of science, which is taking on a form of a cosmology, which is basically quantum physics, right? If you follow it closely, most quantum physicists, at least privately, will say that, you know, the interesting thing is that what we're really discovering in quantum physics is what mystics have been saying all along, that it's all true, right? We're just finding ways now to validate that and explore it with technology that lands in a way that Western people can cognize it. So for me, that's the beauty of Eagle Condor prophecy. If you just that example alone, that through Western technology, we're able to have a conversation about things like non-locality. Why is it that when you find yourself connected to somebody, there stays a connection? You know, this idea that particle and wave theory, for instance, that everything is existing is really just a field of infinite possibility, right? But it's through our paying attention, right, through human interaction with that, that one of those infinite possibilities falls into an actual reality, you know, falls into probability. That in and of itself is what we're calling Eagle Condor. You know, it's taking these intuitive ideas and ideas that our ancestors have passed on to us, and taking a Western approach to exploring them, you know, and you bring them together, and it's like, aha, guess what? It's true. You know, it's true that we're connected to our ancestors. You know, it's true that we are connected from a distance, you know, and it's true, I won't say it's true, but the latest theory you guys have probably heard of, you know, which is really fascinating, is the idea that what Eastern mystics have been saying all along is starting to appear to be true, that the whole thing is an illusion, that it is possibly a simulation, right? That life as we now know isn't at all what we think it is. Right? That on one hand, there's you sitting in that room and you could hit the table and say that it's hard. On another, we know from another perspective that that's a complete illusion, that everything in that room is all made of the same thing. And even though I appear to be on the screen miles and miles away from you, in reality, that's not true at all. We're actually one shared consciousness sharing this moment together. That's the beauty. That's all I have to say. The rest... So what I'm most always excited about is actually just what you guys are doing with this club, is entering in this new conversation, you know, about psychedelics and the role that they're playing in this evolution of consciousness and healing and spiritual work. So with that, I would just love to hear any questions from you that we can get into a dialogue about. And I would like to request, if you're asking a question, would you come closer to the mic? Because I couldn't hear the people in the back, actually.
Time I had a question.
Hey, Tony. I think it's great that ayahuasca has been gaining popularity, and you know, hopefully the Eagle Condor prophecy is kind of gaining steam. However, I've been reading also about the supplies in the Amazon being depleted of like the ayahuasca plants, and that there's been some concerns about how these plants are being harvested.
Yes.
So how can we consume responsibly?
We don't know yet, is the answer. I was just at the World... I said, the answer is we don't know yet. Yeah, I was just at the World Ayahuasca Conference in Brazil, and also attended the MAPS conference in Oakland. And a big conversation, of course, is sustainability. Ayahuasca is gaining in popularity exponentially. and having a really beautiful, powerful effect on Western people. And like most things in the West, it has also spurned a commercialization and a commodification of the plant. So it's like anything, you know, we're in a new conversation. The indigenous people, when the Shipibo particularly, when they gave their blessing to start bringing ayahuasca to the West because they knew that it was needed, no one anticipated what effect that would have on the harvesting of the vine there. So it's not that it's not possible for it to be sustainably harvested. I mean, the good news is that it grows wild and grows best wild. The conversations now is there's a lot of projects taking place, at least 3 that I know of, where various groups are either raising money to support the natives in doing this, or they're just doing it themselves, of taking large swaths of land that are owned by, technically, or demarcated for indigenous people, and starting to plant the leaf and the vine all over Amazonia in places where it can be harvested. Because at the moment, what's happening is the ayahuasqueros are needing to go deeper and deeper into the jungle each time they need to make a huge batch of ayahuasca. And like anything else there, without a doubt, it's not now in a danger zone, but without some input, it will be in the next 10 years. Yeah, I really appreciate that question so much, because with the popularity of ayahuasca in the West, of course, comes a lot of problems and dangers, mostly around this idea of, well, 2 things happen. One is, you know, Western people quickly realize that here's a new way that I can sustain myself and make money, right? Charging exorbitant amounts and creating retreats for ceremony, right? As opposed to a dedication to the outcome, you know, the possibility for the healing that can take place. And the other is the Western ego, when it gets a hold of, oh, now I can be the shaman guy and the one bringing all the healing to people. Those 2 forces coming together are causing a lot of issues in the West, but it's not unknown. It's a very active conversation that's being addressed by the worldwide ayahuasca community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
As close as you would like.
Hey, Tony.
Hello.
I have earplugs in, so now I'm going to yell at you. So my name's Amanda. I've been using MDMA and other substances for PTSD, kind of following the MAPS protocol.
Right.
And I've had a lot of success with it. Haven't ventured into ayahuasca. But one thing I've noticed with that, just anecdotally, seems like with ayahuasca there's a lot more kind of repeat visitors, where people will be doing it, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 times. And I've always kind of why ayahuasca kind of tends to do that more so than, say, you know, LSD or mushrooms or MDMA, or if that's not even an accurate observation. But that's just kind of what I've noticed, just because of the sample size.
Yeah, it's a very accurate observation, actually.
Any thoughts on why ayahuasca maybe like that?
You know,
or is it
yes.
We're drawn to ayahuasca, or the experience itself, or?
Yeah, it's a lot of things, and I will tell you what I feel like I've seen the most and why that is the case. If you find well, first of all, ayahuasca delivers, right? Meaning, a lot of other psychedelics haven't been utilized in a ceremonial, ritual, and in some cases not even guided context, right? So although you can have a beautiful experience, you're just as likely to have a bad one, or just one that is, you know, very entertaining, but also kind of grueling, you know, and challenging. So it's not something you want to do a lot of. Obviously, there are people that do. Ayahuasca is unique in that it's happening almost universally in a ceremonial setting. These are, you know, innate human desires is to connect with other people, to have a sense of connection with the cosmos, have a sense of self, higher self, a sense of spiritual connection, the idea that you're not alone, that there might actually be forces larger than yourself, right? And this desire to be a part of a community. Those are the reasons why people, once they find an ayahuasca group that they like, and of course you want to do it again and again. Yeah. Yeah. And the other aspect of that is what I said earlier. Ayahuasca takes you on a journey from personal healing to transpersonal healing. A lot of people realize after 5, 6, 7 ayahuasca sessions that there really is this endless, void of exploration, and that you never know in which ceremony that you're going to have a really beautiful peak experience, let's say meeting your grandmother. The very next one, you're meeting alien beings and have an amazing, conversation about the nature of life on the planet. Or you're getting information about how to move forward with your own life and how to participate in the healing of other people. So it's not that it becomes addictive, it becomes so satisfying over a long period of time that people typically, if they find a group they like, most people, will come back 20, 30 times, if not just make it their way of life.
Yeah.
Which you don't necessarily get with other psychedelics because they're not happening typically in a ceremonial setting. Yeah. So you don't have that sense of kind of universal connection and being part of a group that somehow is participating in a larger movement. That's starting to happen with other psychedelics. MDMA particularly. There's actually a lot of beautiful ceremonial work happening with MDMA that's incredibly successful, that's healing, whole communities. Yeah. So I think psychedelics, again, since it's now kind of coming out of its inquisition stages, from the 60s on, it's starting to find all its various possibilities of how it can be utilized and incorporated into our lives. Thank you.
That's rad. So, and it's a tonic too. It's a healing tonic. I tell you that.
I would agree. Definitely not a cure-all, but an extremely potent and effective medicine for sure.
My name's Joey. I'm Vice President of the club. Going back to the ceremony thing, I just got back from a Grateful Dead concert, so I think that's like our version of like ceremony and LSD and stuff.
Absolutely.
I totally agree with the whole everything that's been said, but I think our version of ceremony is coming together. Like this is kind of a ceremony right now. Like
yes,
technology is uniting us and things like this. So I think we're kind of creating our own ceremonies.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Many people have spoken about this, and I had this realization during that period when I was 40 that I talked about, but it wasn't unique to me. I was just able to have my own direct experience. One of the major problems we're having in the West is that we've removed ceremony and ritual from our lives. It's been replaced with plastic versions of that. Like you graduate from high school, and then we tell you as society you can now drink alcohol. You're graduating from college. There's lots of ways that we have replaced authentic rites of passage ceremonies with kind of token recognitions, right? But we actually need in our lives these acknowledgments of the various cycles that we go through. If you picture, being particularly a teenage boy, because that's what I'm familiar with, of course, that period when suddenly your hormones are raging and suddenly muscles are growing and you start to become aware that you're powerful. Indigenous cultures recognized that and created ceremonies so that that could be officially acknowledged, and they would show you ways to be with that, right? The reason a lot of indigenous cultures didn't suffer from anxiety and psychospiritual illnesses was because they were having regular ceremonies where the psyche could be played out. There were cathartic experiences that were actually designed to keep you healthy and whole. So you're right. What we're starting to see now, even in meetings like this, and I 100% agree. I remember going to my first Dead concert, and it was my first ceremonial experience. The sacrament at the time was ganja, of course, and I didn't try LSD at that first one, but other people did. And because of the music and everybody being on the same page and the lights and everything, I really left for the first time feeling like that I participated in some kind of communal experience with other people that also had a sense of transcendence attached to it. So those have become Western ceremonies. I agree with you 100%. They're just now starting to refine themselves.
Yeah. And I just did psychedelics on nature. And I don't know, I kind of hate gambling, but
This is me.
Anyone else?
I want to come up and support that element. Being a traditional healer, person that does this in a traditional sense.
Yeah.
All my elders and people that have sort of like sent me out here to recon, you know, away from the Native American church.
Right.
Because there's a lot of people in the Native American church don't like what I'm doing to bring what I know out to everybody here. But that's not our way. You know?
Right.
And the reason that people are using that and recreating their own ceremony because they have no access and tradition because of oppression of cultures. We share, you know, the same heritage. I have Native American, half an African American. You know, both oppressive cultures I've been part of. So these are the kind of things that bringing our people back into these things that people of color we're talking about, that divide, but also making room for accepting all kinds of different ways of ceremony. I'm a person also a physicist that works with lasers. I design, build lasers. And I used to love doing raves. I saw that as a really modern type of ceremony.
Yes.
You know, it's an indigenous. You know, I saw that. You know, but being able to make these ceremonies, wachuma, peyote, ayahuasca, these kind of things, in a true traditional sense, making that available, but not also the traditional people not condemning other ways that may be non-traditional, but being able to establish who we are and a tradition that people can come back and get refueled. They go back out and have fun.
Yeah. You know, you speak to something that's really close to my heart, and it is this idea that, like everything else, ceremony and ritual are evolving. Everything's an evolution. And the idea that we should stay fixed on a traditional use of ayahuasca or iboga or peyote or San Pedro is counter to what we see when we look at nature and the cosmos all around us. You know, part of this ego condor prophecy plays itself out as this, what we're calling neo-shamanism, this new way that ayahuasca is starting to emerge in the West that is actually much more effective for Western people, actually. You know, with the things that are said, the music that's being played, you know, how the ceremonies are conducted. And the other thing I want to speak to what you brought up, you know, about 3 or 4 years before the Ego Condor Prophecy 2012 officially landed, I first heard about that because I went to a special meeting of the Santo Daime Church, and it was going to be an Ego Condor ceremony. I had no idea what that was. And it turns out at that ceremony, they brought together 3 or 4 chiefs from the NAC from all over the country, and they invited them to our ceremony. And in the middle of that ceremony, we turned over, everybody drank ayahuasca, them too. And then we turned over the ceremony to them, and they played traditional, you know, TP and Anipi like ceremony songs, right? Amazing experience. And at the end of it, the chief representing them all, and Colonel Parker's daughter was there, who actually brought peyote. You know, his granddaughter was at the ceremony. And the chief representing the Council of all the Native American churches stood up and he said, "We want you to know that the reason we're here is that although peyote is our traditional medicine, we are acknowledging that it's not curing our people of addictions. And we have heard about ayahuasca, and we wanted to come here today because we know there's this movement and people are trying to, you know, starting to explore." And he said, "We want you to know that we are going back to the council and telling officially all Native American people that," his direct quote, "ayahuasca is good medicine."
Yeah, yeah. See, that's what's been my battle. I've been fighting these traditional, because the thing is that if our tradition does not propagate, we don't evolve, accept other methods. I'm the one that brought wachuma. You know, it's like peyote. No, you know, peyote is being depleted. Wachuma is more sustainable.
Right.
So the event was to bring that in as another, you know, reasonable substitutes along with ayahuasca. These things should also be accepted. I think.
Yeah, that's part of the Renaissance and the beauty of what's taking place. absolutely adhere to what we call being in right relationship with plant medicines, which of course means being in right relationship with indigenous cultures. People often ask me, how do we avoid appropriation? How do Western people avoid appropriating these things we find? I go, yeah, the answer is really simple. You pay respect and give respect to the sources of where it's coming from. That means that we respect the tradition. We should go and learn the tradition. Study and understand the roots of the tradition that the medicine is coming from and why it evolved in that way. Once you get that, absolutely, there's going to be hybridization and evolution taking place, and that's what we're seeing. And there's nothing wrong with it, but it's also a big experiment that we're all engaged in at the same time. Everybody from the 60s on that experimented with LSD and mushrooms and later MDMA, without realizing it, they were all participating in the research. It's only now that we have a collective body of knowledge, of Western people as a whole, that we can sit together in circles like this, which is why I applaud what you're doing, and we can actually start having dialogue about what we've all learned, right? So that is the research, and this is how we're developing new Western traditions of ceremony, and basically we could just say psycho-spiritual exploration. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hey Tony, I was one of the guys in back that you couldn't hear. Hopefully this will tie in nicely with some of the previous questions. I just got back from 2 ceremonies in Costa Rica. I was saving up for years. It's expensive to get down there, hard to find the right place. Ended up kind of settling on a place that was a little bit more westernized. I was a little bit glad to hear you say that you thought that was maybe necessary, that some sort of a hybrid, ceremony that uses these indigenous traditions, but also a bit more comfortable to people from the West. I just was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on your personal experiences with different types of ceremonies, different types of shamans. I know, the Santo Daime is a completely different ceremony than a lot of other ayahuasca ceremonies. And, in a nutshell, I got the impression that the medicine works no matter what, no matter what the texture, and it's going to do its work. So, what's most important? Just making sure that people have these experiences in a way that is, good enough, or making sure that it's done in a perfect way. So I think too many people maybe put an emphasis on the set and setting, and that you got to make sure you're going to the perfect place with the perfect shaman. And sometimes I get the impression it's a little bit more important for people to just do this work. So do you have anything else on that?
Yeah, I would recontextualize your question. What we're really talking about is there's a category of people that feel that no matter what, maintaining the traditional use is what's most important, right? Whatever tradition that they're coming from, or that they've studied. So much so that anything that anyone else is doing is being compared to that is seen as less than or wrong, right? The reality of it is that ayahuasca, as long as it's in the hands of an experienced facilitator, that knows what they're doing, it's gonna work, right? And it's more important to adapt your ceremony for the group of people that you find yourself with than it is to staunchly adhere to a tradition that might, in that context, actually be stagnant. It may not work. A lot of the neo-shamanic ceremonies that are taking place in the West, which are exquisitely beautiful, the only real difference is that they're not just singing Icaros, Icados, if you think about it, well, here's a great example. I recently got back from doing a dieta in Peru, and Manuela, who's a 60, 70-year-old curandera, someone asked her at some point, if it was okay to sing English in the ceremony. And the translator, what she said to us was, she said, the only reason I'm singing in Quechua is because it's the only language I know. She said, if I knew English, I would sing to you in English. She said, She said, what's more important is that you're hearing the prayers and that they're landing, or that you're hearing the intention of what's being shared. So a lot of what's happening in indigenous ceremonies developed in a cultural context. It doesn't translate to Western people so much, right? So what's happening in the neo-shamanic ceremonies are being called is that a lot of those traditional Icaros are being placed with this beautiful ceremonial music that's happening. And certainly Icaros are being acknowledged and sung. A lot of instrumental music. The new phenomenon of sound healing is now taking place in ceremony. some pop songs that actually have really beautiful spiritual messages are being shared in ceremony, and people are having really profound, transcendent experiences hearing those songs. So this is an example of how the ceremonies have been modified for Western people, and in some ways are much more available and accessible because the references being used and the archetypes being summoned have more meaning for us.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
That's good.
Anyone else?
Yep. Hi, I'm Daniela.
Hi, Daniela.
All kinds of plant and chemical things since 1968.
Right on.
What you're doing is not new. You're about the fourth generation in this exploration. When I go to San Francisco and Northern California, I'm not the first generation either. There's older people who have been doing it. And the work has always been about going inside, you know, and finding your particular ally in that. I've done ayahuasca. Wasn't my medicine. It's just not. I've done peyote. I've done, my favorite is MDMA. It's what works for taking me to the place of perfection.
Yes.
And in that place, I know it's in me and not in the pill. And I can see it out in the world for, a good 6-8 months, and then I gotta go again. And I just want to object to this is the only way to go, and it's something new. It's not new. I mean, 20 years ago, I was going to conferences in Palenque with all the plant people. I did a conference in Hawaii with Terrence McKenna. This is not new, and I hope it continues to be new for everyone.
I am in 100% agreement. This is not new. Okay, well,
That's it.
It goes back over 10,000 years.
Yeah. We're in absolute agreement. Anyone else?
Nobody else has any questions? I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight.
Yeah.
You guys are why we get to do this. In that vein, like I said, I'm the treasurer, so if you guys want to make any donations, I'm going to hang around afterwards. Again, tomorrow is our 1-year anniversary, so if you want to even share any of our content on Facebook or meet up with friends, family, we really appreciate it. And can we get one more round of applause for Tony?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. In closing, I just want to share how what I said earlier. Just showing up at these meetings and participating in this dialogue. What's important isn't answers, and finding things that are right or wrong. What's valuable is that for the first time in human history on a global level, we're able to engage in this conversation about our relationship with plant medicines and sacraments and psychedelics, which are all derivatives of plant medicines. And not only what that means for humanity, but what's possible, right? And you're all participating in that. So with that, I say thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.